This guy was bad. This guy was great. He wrote music criticizing that guy, and that guy didn't like it. Today, we're talking about Dmitri Shostakovich's 10th Symphony and how it reflects the composer's relationship with Stalin. Just some quick background on Shostakovich to give the piece some context. Shostakovich was born in St. Petersburg on the 25th of September 1906 to a relatively affluent family, and his musical talent was recognized, and he began attending the Petrograd Conservatory at age 13. When I was 13, I had a bar mitzvah. That was it. And he wrote his first symphony at age 19, which I still have some time to do. And it was received very well within Russia and internationally. And for the most part, for his first, second, and third symphonies and all the works that came with those, he enjoyed a very peaceful career away really from government scrutiny until we get into the 1936, until we get really deep into the Stalin years. And Stalin was actually at the opera that first got Shostakovich in trouble, which was Lady Macbeth of the Mtsensk district, which Stalin had denounced as a formalist work, which really was a catch-all term to screen out, to filter out artists that Stalin and the Soviet government did not agree with, but the technical definition of formalism in this context would be pertaining back to the old Western styles of music, which Shostakovich very much was. I mean, he's writing in this neo-romantic style, and it's the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and I mean really later into the 50s and 60s. His work is not with the 12-tonal systems that's common and the atonal theory that's very popular at the time. A lot happened between Shostakovich's first official denunciation and the 10th Symphony. A world war, including the siege of Leningrad, a divorce, a second denunciation, and almost all of his friends were imprisoned or killed during the purges. As I mentioned before, Shostakovich's relationship with the state was very rocky. Oftentimes, he took positions within the party to escape further criticism and lower the risk of him being sent to the Gulag or killed, which is a pretty smart move. The Ninth Symphony, published right after the war, was condemned for not being patriotic enough. Shostakovich did not release another symphony until after Stalin's death, which was 8 years. The lengthy break between works heavily suggests that the 10th is more of a sarcastic requiem for Stalin rather than a, quote, emotional outlet for the people to mourn the death of their great leader, which is how Shostakovich had to classify the work in order for it to get past the censors. Emphasizing this point in an interview prior to performance of the 10th, conductor Andris Nelsons, who grew up in the twilight of the Soviet Union in Riga, describes the symphony as a portrait of the, quote, destroyed lives of artists, destroyed lives, literally. Even if Stalin's dead, what harm he's done to the country can be seen in the results of what the system has done. Symphony, and most of Shostakovich's works, sound like it could be straight out of the Romantic era, even though it was released in the heyday of the modernist movement. The abnormality in style reflects the situation that Shostakovich was in. Any music that would be too modern or too ancient would be denounced by the Soviet Union, and his work would not be able to be showcased. So Shostakovich had to find a way to make critical commentary about the party while remaining within what they thought was acceptable. So Shostakovich became a master at sneaking hidden messages and conveying his contempt through his symphonies while getting past the party censors, and his 10th Symphony is one of the finest at doing that. So on a general note, Shostakovich writes his solos for this piece either in a monophonic, where it's just the soloist, even though you have a 100-person orchestra, or a homophonic setting. The soloists are always separate and alone from the rest of the orchestra, and these lonely voices really could be a tribute to Shostakovich's friends, musicians, and artists that he lost throughout the purges. It could be referencing other people in his personal life. It could be referencing anything. The wonderful thing about the Shostakovich is that he writes so much into his works that you never quite are able to pin down. So I'm going to attempt to pin down a few things, and we're going to jump right into the music. The first movement is very horizontal. The vertical harmonies appear rarely, and they do so on a grand scale when you have the whole orchestra playing fortissimo together. The melodies are also kept constrained and for the first portion of the first movement, and there are really no large interval jumps, much like pre-Hildegard von Bingen Gregorian chants. She was the one really who started adding in thirds and fourths into plain chant. Quarter of the way through the first movement, there's a brief moment where the bass voices come in on the offbeats of the waltz that the strings are playing pits underneath a flute soloist. And these hiccups in this waltz that is now imperfect, it gives it really this backbeat, circus-like atmosphere, which, if we're talking in the context of Russian ballet and Russian theater, definitely signals that not everything that you see is going to plan, which is most certainly what he was trying to convey. Also worth noticing in this movement is there's this melody of alternating major second, minor second intervals that will also come back up in the last movement. And the repetitive nature of this, it gives it a sense of mindlessness. The descending pitches, it's because it's just seconds and minor seconds, it's not too big of a gap, so it's not too much out of the ordinary. So it's something you can accept for when it starts descending down more and down until you've passed the melody all the way off to the basses because you've gone so far deep into the register. And it's like how Shostakovich was pushed further and further down into the rabbit hole of the Soviet censures while he was writing his symphonies. Skipping to the end of the first movement, we do see a glimmer of sunshine come through. Overall, the first movement is very melodramatic. It's very tense and doesn't really give you a space to breathe, but it comes at the very, very end where we have this piccolo solo. Again, it's a very lonely voice, lonely solo coming in at the end. And it's a welcome reprieve from the really oppressive orchestra, but it's also an illusion that will come later in the third movement with the Elmira theme. Our second movement is the shortest out of all the movements. It's about 5 minutes, thereabouts an hour-long symphony, with the first movement being the longest. And it's complete contrast to the first. We have this massive, slow, and pensive, intense movement, and it's the longest chunk of the symphony. And all of a sudden, we have this 5-minute frantic running around carnival with lots of notes, lots of loud notes too. And this juxtaposition is especially important because it's the second movement that Shostakovich specifically noted that he's talking about Stalin, and it's the one direct reference to Stalin. He doesn't say what he's trying to convey, but given the fact that we've transitioned from this darker, slower movement to this still dark but frantic and rushed movements, means to me that Stalin definitely encouraged fear, encouraged uncertainty, and Shostakovich portrayed that perfectly in his second movement. And now we move into our third movement. And what we begin to notice is that while the piece is obviously polyphonic, as orchestral composition had been for 300, 400 years by then, there's a lot of imitative polyphony with the violins in their melody lines, and if you take a listen here, I'll be able to show that for you. And this slight offset creates this idea of duality. It portrays the difference, really, between the Shostakovich he had to show to public and the version of himself he could keep in private. And also in the third movement, we have our two most famous components, or relatively most well-known components, and that's the Elmira and the DSCH themes. The Elmira theme is a 4-note horn call that represents his unrequited love, Elmira Nazaroyev, who was also a student of his. The horn call functions as a source of sanity in the insane regime of Stalin, providing stability for Shostakovich until it fades away, the music descending with it. The DSCH theme refers to the initials in the German spelling of Shostakovich's name, DSCH, which, and also the German music notation, which would also correspond to, in German notation, D, E flat, C, B. If you play this out on a piano, you notice it's not some normal, pretty major chord. It's dissonant. It's very dissonant. And Shostakovich has weaved this throughout his entire works. There's always you can always find it somewhere, but this motif is implemented in the 10th very, very explicitly. He's placing a very individual stamp on this work, which is something interesting to do in a communist state. And there's this beautiful moment at the end of the third movement where the orchestra comes in with the DSCH, the entire orchestra comes in with the DSCH motif, and it modulates the motif chromatically down in half steps. It just keeps on going down, 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 dynamics descending with it, so it's a decrescendo as well, until we end up with this pseudo-duet between our horn playing the Elmira theme, and then a solo violin playing the melody we heard at the beginning of the movement. And then even those fade away, and all that's left at the end of the movement is, again, a solo piccolo playing the DSCH theme at the end of the movement. The fourth movement is more or less a recapitulation of the previous three movements. However, it is personally, it's my second favorite movement, because several times throughout the fourth movement, we just have the DSCH theme screamed by the entire orchestra. And it's different this time instead of the third movement, because whereas our second movement was portraying Stalin himself, our third movement was portraying Shostakovich's struggles. By the fourth movement, we've broken free of Stalin. The fourth movement, to me, sounds like this joyous occasion. The flutes sound like birds fluttering through the woods, and everyone sounds free and open again. And the DSCH theme has been screamed by the entire orchestra, and it's powerful. You have 100 people playing one motif over and over and over again. And even at the end, while everyone else has resolved the timpani is still playing DSCH theme. Holds the neck. And just spreads out. You've heard it over and over, and you've heard it quietly, almost like it's staged. And hearing it so strong in the fourth movement is Shostakovich saying, I survived. Stalin did not. I survived the state. I was able to get out. It's really this triumphant moment of survival and achievement for Shostakovich, and really a testament to that he was able to keep his artistic freedom in such a strict society.